The snow-covered mountains of Switzerland stood silent under the golden glow of the afternoon sun. Nestled between them was one of the most exclusive luxury resorts in the world, a place where only the wealthy, the powerful, and the elite came to escape. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Staff members moved with precision. Every detail was perfect. Until he walked in. Steven Seagal stepped through the grand glass doors, dressed simply in a dark coat, his presence calm and unbothered. No designer labels. No flashy watch. Nothing that screamed wealth. And that's exactly why people noticed him. A few guests sitting in the lounge glanced over, whispering to each other. "Is he lost?" one of them muttered. At the front desk, a young receptionist looked him up and down, clearly unimpressed. She forced a polite smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sir," she said, her tone slightly cold, "this is a private resort. Do you have a reservation?" Steven paused for a moment, looking around the lobby as if observing every detail, the staff movements, the security cameras, the layout. Then he answered calmly, "I'm just here to check in." The receptionist exchanged a quick glance with another staff member, barely hiding a smirk. "Of course," she replied, typing slowly. "And under what name?" Before he could answer, a sharply dressed manager approached, already sensing something was off. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. The receptionist leaned closer and whispered just loud enough to be heard. "He says he's here to check in, but I can't find anything." The manager turned toward Steven, his expression shifting into a polite but dismissive smile. "Sir," he said, "this resort caters to a very specific clientele. Perhaps you've mistaken it for somewhere else." A couple of nearby guests chuckled quietly. Steven didn't react. He simply stood there, calm as ever. That only made the situation more awkward. Because while everyone else saw an ordinary man who didn't belong, there was something about him that didn't match their assumptions. His posture. His confidence. The way he observed everything without saying much. It was subtle. But it was there. And yet, no one paid attention. Not yet. The manager crossed his arms slightly. "Unless you can confirm a reservation," he added, "I'm afraid we can't assist you." A brief silence followed. Steven finally looked directly at him. "Steady. Are you sure about that?" he asked. The manager frowned slightly. He didn't like the tone. But before he could respond, something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would change the way everyone in that lobby saw the quiet man standing in front of them. "Before we continue, have you ever seen someone judged just by their appearance? Comment yes, and tell me where you're watching from." The manager didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Steven Seagal more carefully this time. Not out of respect, but suspicion. In a place like this, appearances mattered. Status mattered. And right now, this man standing calmly in front of him didn't seem to fit either category. "I'm very sure," the manager replied, his tone now firmer. "We run a very exclusive operation here. Everything is pre-booked months in advance." A few guests nearby leaned in slightly, pretending not to listen, but clearly interested. Steven didn't move. Didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. Instead, his eyes slowly moved across the lobby again. He noticed the security placement near the entrance. The positioning of the front desk cameras. The timing of staff movement. It wasn't random observation. It was intentional. And one of the older staff members, standing near the concierge desk, noticed it. He frowned slightly. Because this wasn't how a confused guest behaved. This was how someone assessed a place. Meanwhile, the receptionist tried again, tapping her keyboard with exaggerated patience. "Sir," she said, her voice now slightly sharper, "if you don't have a reservation, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. You're holding up other guests." Another quiet laugh came from the lounge area. But Steven still didn't react. Instead, he asked a simple question. "What's your occupancy rate right now?" The receptionist blinked. The manager frowned. "That's not information we share," he said quickly. Steven nodded slightly, as if confirming something in his mind. "I see." That answer didn't sit well with the manager. Because suddenly, the dynamic felt different. "Look," the manager said, stepping closer, lowering his voice. "We don't want any trouble. If you're looking for accommodation, there are plenty of other hotels down the road." A subtle dismissal. Polite on the surface, but clear underneath. "You don't belong here." For a brief moment, the air felt heavier. Even some of the guests shifted uncomfortably, because something about this situation wasn't normal anymore. Steven finally placed one hand lightly on the front desk. Not aggressively, not forcefully, just enough to ground the moment. "Interesting," he said quietly. The manager narrowed his eyes. "What is?" Steven looked directly at him. "The way your staff handles pressure," he replied. The manager let out a short laugh. "Pressure," he said. "This isn't pressure." But the older staff member near the concierge desk was now watching very closely, because he could see something others couldn't. The manager thought he was in control, but he wasn't. Steven continued calmly. "No verification process," he added. "No escalation protocol. Just assumptions." The receptionist shifted in her seat. The manager's smile faded slightly. "I think you've said enough," the manager replied, his tone tightening. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave now." There it was. The final line. A quiet attempt to end the situation. But Steven didn't move. Not even an inch. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket. The movement was slow, deliberate, and suddenly, everyone in the lobby was watching. The receptionist stopped typing. The manager's posture stiffened. Even the guests fell silent, because something about that moment felt different. Steven pulled out his phone, looked at it briefly, then made a call. No rush, no tension, just calm precision. The manager scoffed lightly. "Calling someone isn't going to change anything," he said. Steven didn't respond. He simply waited. A few seconds passed. Then someone picked up on the other end. Steven spoke just one sentence. "I'm here." That was it. No explanation. No names. Nothing else. He ended the call, and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The manager shook his head, clearly unimpressed. But the older staff member near the concierge desk? His expression had completely changed now, because he had just realized something. Something no one else had noticed yet. This wasn't a man trying to get in. This was a man who didn't need permission. And in just a few moments, everyone else in that lobby was about to realize it too. For a moment, nothing happened. The lobby remained still, suspended in a strange silence that no one could quite explain. The call had been short, too short. No name, no explanation. Just two simple words. "I'm here." The manager exhaled sharply, clearly unimpressed. "Well," he said, forcing a thin smile, "if that was your last attempt, I'm afraid it didn't work." A couple of guests nearby chuckled again, more confidently this time. From their perspective, this situation was already over. But Steven Seagal hadn't moved. He stood exactly where he was, calm as ever, as if time itself didn't matter to him. That calmness, it started to bother the manager. Because people who were wrong usually reacted. They argued. They defended themselves. They tried to prove something. But this man, he wasn't doing any of that. And that made no sense. "Sir," the manager said again, this time more firmly, "I'm going to ask you one last time to leave the premises." The words were sharper now. Less polite. More forceful. The receptionist looked down at her desk, avoiding eye contact. Even she could feel the tension rising. Still, Steven didn't move. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward the large windows overlooking the snow-covered mountains. For a brief moment, it almost looked like he wasn't even part of the situation anymore. Then he spoke. "You have a beautiful property," he said quietly. The manager blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "What?" Steven turned back to him. "Great location. Strong potential," he continued. "But your frontline judgment." He paused. "Needs work." A few guests exchanged looks. That didn't sound like a guest anymore. That sounded like criticism. Professional criticism. The manager's jaw tightened. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," he replied coldly. Security will be here in a moment. That word changed everything. Security. Now the situation had officially escalated. The older staff member near the concierge desk straightened up slightly, watching closely. He looked like he wanted to say something, but held back. Because now, even he wasn't sure what would happen next. Steven nodded once, as if he expected that response. Of course, he said calmly. No resistance. No reaction. Just acceptance. And somehow, that made it worse. The manager stepped back slightly, regaining his confidence now that he had taken control of the situation. You see, he said, turning slightly toward the nearby guests as if performing, we maintain a certain standard here. More quiet laughter. More approval. But beneath that surface confidence, something was starting to feel off. Because the longer this went on, the more unnatural Steven's calmness felt. Then, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway behind the front desk. Fast. Urgent. Not the slow, controlled walk of security. The manager frowned slightly and turned his head. So they're finally here, he muttered. But when the figure appeared, it wasn't security. It was the resort's senior operations director. And he didn't look calm. He looked alarmed. His eyes scanned the lobby quickly, then locked onto Steven. And in that exact moment, his face changed. Completely. The color drained. His posture stiffened. And without saying a word to anyone else, he walked straight toward him. Fast. Purposeful. The manager blinked, confused. Sir, he said, stepping forward. Is everything all right? But the director didn't respond. Didn't even look at him. He stopped just a few feet in front of Steven. And for the first time since this all began, someone in that room looked nervous. Very nervous. The entire lobby fell silent again. No laughter. No whispers. Just tension. Because everyone could feel it now. Something big was about to happen. The director took a small breath. Then spoke. Sir, he said carefully. Why didn't you inform us you were arriving today? The manager froze. The receptionist looked up instantly. The guests leaned forward. Because in that single sentence, everything changed. And the man they had been mocking just minutes ago was no longer a stranger. He was someone important. Someone powerful. Someone they should have recognized. But it was too late for that now. Because in the next few seconds, the truth about Steven Seagal was about to come out. And when it did, no one in that lobby would ever forget this moment. Before we continue, did you expect this twist? Or did you see it coming? Comment, twist, if this surprised you. The lobby had gone completely silent. Not the kind of silence that fades in naturally, but the kind that drops suddenly, like something invisible just shifted in the room. All eyes were now on the senior operations director, and on Steven Seagal. The manager stood frozen, still trying to process what he had just heard. Sir, he said again, more uncertain this time. Do you know him? But the director didn't respond immediately. He kept his eyes on Steven, his posture now straight, almost tense, like someone standing in front of a superior. Sir, he repeated, this time with more urgency, we weren't informed of your visit. If we had known. Steven raised his hand slightly. Not aggressively. Just enough to stop him. There's no need, he said calmly. The director immediately fell silent. That alone sent a ripple through the room. Because moments ago, this same director commanded authority over the entire resort staff. And now, he was being stopped mid-sentence, without hesitation. The manager felt a tight knot form in his stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I don't understand, the manager said, forcing a small laugh. What exactly is going on here? The director slowly turned his head toward him. And for the first time, there was no friendliness in his expression. Only seriousness. You didn't recognize him? He asked quietly. The manager hesitated. No. The director took a step closer. Lowered his voice, but not enough to keep others from hearing. This, he said carefully, is the man who owns a controlling stake in this entire resort chain. The words didn't register immediately. It was like the room needed a second to catch up. Then, everything changed. The receptionist's eyes widened. One of the guests nearly dropped his glass. The quiet whispers from earlier, gone, replaced by stunned silence. The manager blinked, his expression completely drained of confidence. "That's not possible," he said under his breath. But deep down, he already knew it was. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The calm, the confidence, the way he observed everything without asking. The questions about operations, the lack of reaction. This wasn't a man trying to get in. This was a man who already belonged. No, more than that. This was a man who didn't need permission to be anywhere. The manager turned slowly back toward Steven, his posture no longer relaxed, no longer confident, now uncertain. "Sir," he said, his voice noticeably different, I wasn't aware." Steven looked at him. Not angry, not satisfied, just calm. "That's the problem," he said quietly. The words landed heavier than any shout could have. The manager swallowed hard. Behind him, the receptionist sat completely still, her earlier attitude gone. Even the guests who had been laughing were now avoiding eye contact. Because, in a matter of seconds, the entire situation had flipped. Completely. The director stepped in quickly, trying to regain control. "We sincerely apologize, sir," he said. "This should not have happened. We take full responsibility." Steven didn't respond right away. Instead, he slowly looked around the lobby again. But this time, everyone he looked at immediately lowered their eyes. Moments ago, they had judged him. No, they couldn't even hold his gaze. "That's interesting," Steven said softly. The director tensed slightly. "Sir." Steven folded his hands calmly. "A few minutes ago," he continued, "everyone here seemed very sure of themselves. No one spoke. No one moved. And now," he added, "everything has changed." The manager felt the weight of those words. Because they were true. Painfully true. He had made a judgment. A fast one. Based on appearance. And now, he was standing face to face with the consequences. "I assure you," the manager said quickly, "this was a misunderstanding. Steven shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "It wasn't." That stopped him. Because Steven wasn't angry. He wasn't accusing. He was stating a fact. "You saw someone who didn't fit your expectations," Steven continued. "And you made a decision." The manager had no response. Because there wasn't one. The older staff member near the concierge desk looked down quietly. He had seen it from the beginning. But he hadn't spoken up. And now, he regretted it. The director took a careful step forward. "Sir, please allow us to make this right." Steven finally looked back at him. And for the first time, there was a slight pause in his expression. Not anger. Not frustration. Just consideration. Because what he did next would define everything. Not just for the manager. Not just for the staff. But for the entire resort. And every person standing in that lobby knew it. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was a moment. A turning point. And in the next few seconds, Steven Seagal was about to decide how this story would end. The tension in the lobby was almost unbearable now. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was fixed on Steven Seagal, waiting for his next move. Because in that moment, everyone understood one thing. Whatever he decided next would change everything. The manager stood stiff, his earlier confidence completely gone. The receptionist looked down, avoiding eye contact. Even the guests who had laughed earlier now stood quietly, as if trying to disappear into the background. The senior director stepped forward again, his voice careful, controlled. "Sir," he said, "please allow us to correct this. We take full responsibility for what happened here today." Steven didn't respond immediately. Instead, he slowly walked a few steps forward into the center of the lobby. Each step echoed softly against the polished floor. And with every step, the pressure in the room increased. He stopped. turned and faced the manager directly. "You said something earlier," Steven began calmly. The manager swallowed hard. "Sir, you said this place maintains a certain standard." The manager's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." Steven nodded slightly. "It does," he replied. That answer caught everyone off guard. For a brief second, confusion replaced fear. But then Steven continued. "The location is excellent," he said. "The design is strong. The service potential is high." The director listened carefully, almost relieved, until Steven paused. "But standards aren't measured by appearance." The room fell silent again. "Standards," Steven continued, "are measured by how people are treated when no one important is watching." The words hit harder than anything else he had said, because everyone knew exactly what he meant. The manager lowered his eyes. He couldn't deny it. A few minutes ago, they hadn't seen an important man. They had seen someone they thought didn't belong. And they treated him accordingly. Steven took a slow breath, then looked around the room. "At this level," he said, "every guest should receive the same respect. Not because of who they are, but because of who you are." The receptionist's hands trembled slightly. The older staff member near the concierge desk nodded quietly, absorbing every word. Even the guests now looked thoughtful, uncomfortable, but aware. The director stepped forward again. "Sir, we understand," he said, "and we will ensure this never happens again." Steven turned his gaze toward him. "That depends," he said. The director froze slightly. "On what, sir?" Steven glanced back at the manager. "On whether the lesson is actually learned, or just apologized for." The manager felt that. Deeply. Because this wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. The manager began, his voice unsteady, "I take full responsibility. What happened today was wrong. I made a judgment I shouldn't have." Steven watched him closely. For a moment, it felt like he was measuring something beyond words. Sincerity. Understanding. Growth. "I believed," the manager continued, "that this place was about exclusivity, but I see now that I misunderstood what that really means." Steven said nothing. But he didn't interrupt. "That's not an excuse," the manager added quickly. "Just the truth." A long pause followed. The entire lobby held its breath. Because now, this was the moment. The decision. Steven finally spoke. "Exclusivity," he said slowly, "should never come at the cost of respect." The manager nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." "And leadership," Steven added, "isn't about controlling people. It's about setting the standard they follow." The director listened carefully. So did every staff member in the room. Because this wasn't just feedback anymore. This was direction. This was expectation. Steven looked around one last time. The lobby. The staff. The guests. Everything. Then he made his decision. "I'm not here to fire anyone," he said calmly. A visible wave of relief passed through the room. "But," he continued, "things will change." The relief turned into focus. "Starting today," Steven said, "every member of this staff will go through retraining. Not just in service, but in judgment, awareness, and respect." The director nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. We'll implement it immediately." Steven turned back toward the manager. "And you," he said. The manager straightened instantly. "You're not losing your position," Steven continued. The manager looked shocked. "But you will earn it again." That hit harder than being fired. Because it meant accountability. Real accountability. "I understand," the manager said quietly. Steven held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. And just like that, the outcome was decided. No shouting. No punishment. No dramatic reaction. Just a clear, controlled decision that changed everything. Because, in the end, power wasn't about destroying someone's mistake. It was about correcting it. And everyone in that room knew one thing now. They had just witnessed leadership at its highest level. Before we continue, do you agree with his decision? Type fair if you think he handled it the right way. The atmosphere in the lobby had completely transformed. What started as quiet judgment and subtle mockery had turned into something no one expected: reflection. Real, uncomfortable reflection. Staff members moved again, but not the same way as before. There was no casual arrogance now. No careless glances. Every action felt more deliberate, more aware. And at the center of it all stood Steven Seagal, still calm, still composed, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed. The senior director stepped aside and quickly began issuing instructions in a low voice, calling supervisors, coordinating immediate adjustments. You could feel the urgency, not panic, but purpose. Training session. Full staff. Today, he whispered to one of the supervisors. The message spread fast. Within minutes, small groups of staff began forming discreetly across the lobby, quietly discussing what had just happened. No one was laughing anymore. No one was dismissive. They were thinking. Really thinking. The receptionist, who had first questioned Steven, sat still for a moment before slowly standing up. Her earlier confidence was gone, replaced by something more grounded: awareness. She walked toward him carefully. "Sir," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. Steven turned slightly, giving her his attention. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she continued. "Not just for what I said, but for how I said it." Steven looked at her calmly. There was no anger in his eyes. Only understanding. "You were doing your job," he replied. She shook her head gently. "No, I wasn't doing it the right way." That honesty mattered, because it showed something had shifted. Steven gave a small nod. "That's the difference," he said. Recognizing it. A few steps away, the manager stood quietly, watching the interaction. His posture had changed completely. The authority he once displayed was now replaced by responsibility. He wasn't trying to regain control anymore. He was trying to understand it. The older staff member near the concierge desk approached him slowly. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said quietly. The manager nodded. "I should have," he admitted. "But I didn't look closely enough." The older staff member sighed. "Sometimes," he said, "the most important details are the ones we ignore." The manager didn't argue, because he knew it was true. Across the lobby, a few guests who had witnessed everything began speaking among themselves, but their tone had changed too. "That wasn't what I expected," one of them said quietly. "Same," another replied. Most people in his position would have reacted very differently. They weren't talking about status anymore. They were talking about character. And that was the real impact. The director returned, approaching Steven once again. "Sir, everything is being arranged," he said. "Staff training, internal review, and new service protocols. We'll personally oversee every step." Steven nodded once. "Good," he said. But then he added something else. "Make sure it doesn't become routine." The director paused. "Sir, real change doesn't come from systems," Steven explained. "It comes from mindset. If they don't understand why this matters, nothing will actually change." The director absorbed that carefully. "Yes, sir. Understood." Nearby, the manager stepped forward again. This time, not as someone in control, but as someone accountable. "Sir," he said, "I'd like to personally lead the retraining sessions, if you allow it." The director looked slightly surprised. But Steven didn't respond immediately. He studied him for a moment. "Why?" he asked. The manager didn't hesitate. "Because I made the mistake," he said. "And if I'm responsible for it, I should be responsible for fixing it." That answer carried weight. Real weight. Steven gave a slight nod. "Then do it properly," he said. "I will," the manager replied. And for the first time since everything began, there was confidence in his voice again. But this time, it wasn't arrogance. It was purpose. Across the room, the receptionist joined a small group of staff members preparing for the upcoming session. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing everything. The older concierge staff member smiled faintly. Because this was what real change looked like. Not forced. Not dramatic. But genuine. Steven took one last look around the lobby. The same place where he had been judged just minutes ago. The same place where people had laughed. And now, it felt completely different. Respectful. Aware. Grounded. He turned toward the exit slowly. The director stepped aside immediately. "Sir, your suite has been prepared," he said. "The best one in the resort." Steven paused briefly, then looked back at him. "Every guest should feel like they're in the best suite," he said. The director nodded. "Yes, sir." That was the standard now. Not luxury. Not exclusivity. But respect. As Steven walked toward the doors, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Because the lesson had already been delivered. Clearly. Powerfully. Without force. And as the doors opened, letting in the cold mountain air, everyone inside knew something important. The real value of a place isn't in its design, its price, or its reputation. It's in how it treats people. And that lesson would stay with them long after this day ended. The doors closed softly behind Steven Seagal, and for a moment, no one inside the resort moved. It wasn't because they were unsure of what to do. It was because they were processing what had just happened. A man had walked in, been judged, dismissed, and underestimated. And then, without raising his voice or demanding respect, he had changed the entire culture of the place. The lobby no longer felt the same. It looked the same marble floors, same chandeliers, same perfect mountain view, but something invisible had shifted. Something deeper. The senior director was the first to break the silence. "All right," he said, clapping his hands once, not loudly, but firmly. "Everyone, gather in the main hall." Now, there was no hesitation. Staff members moved quickly, but not in panic. In purpose. Within minutes, the entire frontline team stood together, receptionists, concierge staff, service managers, security personnel. Even the manager stood among them, no longer at the front, but within the group. Equal. Accountable. The director stepped forward. "What happened today," he began, "was not just a mistake. It was a reflection of something deeper in how we operate." No one spoke. No one interrupted. Because for the first time, everyone was truly listening. "We believed that luxury meant exclusivity," he continued. "But today, we learned that true luxury is respect. And respect is not selective." The words carried weight. Because they were no longer just policy. They were truth, earned through experience. The manager stepped forward slowly. His voice was steady, but honest. "I was wrong," he said. That alone surprised some of the staff. Because leaders don't often say that. "At this level," he continued, "we don't get the luxury of making careless judgments. Every person who walks through that door deserves the same level of attention, the same level of dignity." He paused. "And I failed at that today." The room stayed silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. Because accountability, when it's real, doesn't need reaction. It speaks for itself. The receptionist, standing near the front, took a small breath. "I did too," she added quietly. A few others nodded. Because they all saw it now. This wasn't about one person. It was about mindset. The older concierge staff member stepped forward slightly. "I've been in this industry for over 20 years, he said. "And I've seen places rise and fall." Everyone turned to listen. "The ones that rise," he continued, "are not the ones with the best design or the richest guests." He paused. "They're the ones that treat people right, every single time." That line stayed in the air. Because it wasn't just advice. It was experience. The director nodded. "That's exactly what changes today," he said. He looked around the room carefully. "From this moment forward, we don't judge appearance. We don't assume status. We don't decide who matters." He took a step closer. "We treat everyone as if they matter, because they do." Across the room, something shifted again. Not fear. Not pressure. Commitment. Real commitment. Later that evening, the lobby was active again. Guests moved through, conversations resumed, service continued. But something was different. A man walked in, dressed simply, carrying no visible sign of wealth. And this time, The receptionist stood up immediately. "Good evening, sir," she said with a genuine smile. "Welcome. How may I assist you?" No hesitation. No judgment. Just respect. The manager watched from a distance. And for the first time that day, he felt something close to pride. Because the lesson had worked. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But it had begun. Upstairs, in one of the resort suites, Steven stood by the window, looking out over the mountains. The snow reflected the moonlight, calm and untouched. Just like his expression. He wasn't thinking about what happened as a victory. He wasn't replaying the moment. Because, for him, this wasn't about proving a point. It was about reinforcing one. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you practice. Quietly. Consistently. Without conditions. There was a soft knock on the door. The director stood outside when it opened. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to inform you, the changes have already started." Steven nodded once. "I know," he replied. The director hesitated for a moment. "Thank you," he added. Steven looked at him calmly. "For what?" he asked. "For reminding us what really matters," the director said. Steven gave a faint, almost unnoticeable smile. Then said something simple. "Just make sure you don't forget it." The director nodded. "I won't." And with that, he stepped away. The door closed quietly. Back in the lobby, the rhythm of the resort continued. But the meaning behind it had changed. Because sometimes, it takes one moment, one mistake, and one calm, controlled response to transform everything. Not through force, not through fear, but through awareness. And somewhere in that quiet Swiss resort, a powerful lesson had been learned. You never truly know who someone is, but you always control how you treat them. So treat them right. Every time. Before you go. If you believe respect should be given to everyone, no matter how they look, type "respect" in the comments and tell me where you're watching from.